Welcome to Nature's Guardians. I'm Micah Siegel. Each week, I talk with people working to save and help animals around the world. They are nature's guardians, and you can become one too. Today, I'm talking with TJ Fridrich from the Save the Manatee Club. Welcome to the show, TJ.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. Pleasure for me to have you. I have no idea what I just said. Doesn't matter. Okay. So, what are manatees?
So manatees are aquatic mammals, meaning that they live in both fresh and salt water and depend upon the marine, so the saltwater or the freshwater environment in order to survive. They're found, our manatee here in Florida is called the Florida manatee, and they're found all throughout Florida. Anywhere you can connect the coastal ecosystem inland, manatees move between fresh and salt water constantly. In the wintertime, manatees are restricted to warm water sites, so essentially they are unable to stay warm on their own, and they need to find sources of warm water. And in Florida, one of the main sources of warm water are our freshwater springs. But then when the temperature starts to warm up in the spring and summer, they'll leave the springs and go out into estuaries, bays, and travel even out into neighboring states. So they'll go as far west as Texas and as far north as Massachusetts.
They're aquatic mammals. Are they related to hippos?
Their closest land relative is actually the elephant and the hyrax, which is a very small mammal that doesn't really look anything like a manatee.
What's a dugong?
A dugong is a marine mammal in the order Sirenia. So manatees and dugongs are related because they're both Sirenians, but they have completely different face shape and they use different environments. Dugongs are found along the coasts of Australia and in the Indo-Pacific, but there's actually 3 species of manatees in the world. So we have the West Indian manatee, the African manatee, and the Amazonian manatee. And then the West Indian manatee is what we have here, and it's split into 2 subspecies. There's the Caribbean or Antillean manatee, and then the Florida manatee, which is endemic to Florida.
Tell us some fun biology facts about manatees.
So manatees are herbivores. They depend upon aquatic plants, and that includes seagrasses. So those are grasses that grow in saltwater environments, freshwater grasses, floating plants, so water lilies, water hyacinths, and then they also eat algae. They actually eat over 60 species of plants, including land plants. So you'll often see manatees feeding on the banks or the shores, and they'll actually reach up and push their bodies out of the water to eat leaves hanging off of trees.
How do zoos get their manatees?
So most manatees that we see in facilities were rescued and are not what we call permanent residents. So they're there while they're getting some type of care, antibiotics, if they need surgery, if they just say they spent too long away from a warm water source and they got sick, they can get something similar to hypothermia. It's called cold stress, and manatees can get lesions, open wounds, things like that. They get tired and lethargic, and they'll need to be rescued. And then those animals are brought in to specific facilities to go through medical care before they're returned to the wild. It's very rare these days that a manatee will end up in human care permanently, because most manatees are very good healers. The things that they go through, a study came out recently that showed 1 in 4 manatees is hit over 10 times throughout their lifetime by a boat. So manatees are consistently getting hit by boats and surviving and continuing to live on. And most of the time, manatees are able to heal and then be returned to the wild. There are a few animals that are in captivity in human care now that were originally taken from the wild when they were orphan calves. And because a calf stays with its mom for up to 2 years, they usually spend that time learning where to go. Where are the warm water sites? Where can I find the food? Where's the fresh water? And if they're taken out of that environment and never learn where they would need to go, they're not releasable at that point because they wouldn't be able to survive on their own in the wild.
So tell us about these, well, When a boat hits a manatee, right? How are you working to stop that?
What we do as an organization is we help other organizations and agencies to reduce the threats that manatees face. And there's a lot of ways that we do that. One of the big ones is providing educational information to marinas and boat ramps. So information on how to boat in an environment that manatees are in. Wearing polarized sunglasses, for example, is a really great way to be able to see things beneath the surface of the water because it reduces glare. And in Florida, a lot of our marine environments are turbid, so you can't see that a manatee is in the water below you. So going to boat ramps and marinas and letting them know, you can wear polarized sunglasses, having a spotter on your boat, someone whose job is to stand at the front of the boat and look for wildlife, not just manatees, but sea turtles and dolphins and other things like that. We also work with local governments that want to create manatee protection zones. So a manatee protection zone is a boating speed zone where boaters have to reduce their speed because manatees are known to travel through that area, or there's seagrass there, some reason that manatees are more likely to be hit by boats in that area. And hitting a manatee can also cause a lot of damage to boats, but also people can get hurt. So it's in everyone's best interest to slow down within these zones. And so we'll help local governments create the zones or work with the state and identify new areas that need zones. Basically, if there is something that can be identified as an issue in the manatee conservation world, we're going to try to bring attention to it and try to figure out how to solve that problem.
What are the main threats to manatees?
The biggest human-caused threat to manatees is boat strikes. It's estimated that 25% of all the manatees that die each year are from boat strikes. But the longest term threat that manatees face is loss of their habitat. So 66% of manatees are dependent upon artificial sources of warm water in order to survive, those being power plants. And power plants, when they were built, they weren't built to last forever. So the manatees depend upon those power plants in order to stay warm. So if you were to just turn off the power plants, manatees are still going to go there in the wintertime and they're going to die from exposure to cold. So the federal government, the state government, they're working with these power plants to create a plan of action, essentially. What will we do when the power plants have to come offline? Or what will happen if it breaks and it can't create this warm water? Each power plant in Florida has a manatee protection plan that talks about those things already. But as far as action, what is actually going to happen when they come offline, that is something that is currently being worked on. But it is that and then human development. So it's estimated that 1,000 people are moving to Florida every day, and they have to go somewhere. And a lot of them want to be on the coast, which means cutting down mangroves and other native plants, or dredging wetlands or habitats that manatees depend upon. And we want to make sure that any development that's going on, is compatible with manatee survival. And that would mean not destroying their habitat. But we know manatees are everywhere, and it's unrealistic to see that every development doesn't happen. But is there a way that we can make them more sustainable? A big thing that I focus on is living shorelines, which is planting native plants instead of putting in like a seawall, for example. A seawall is just pretty much a slab of concrete that goes up against the shore and is supposed to stop erosion. But what happens is the wave action hits the wall and actually digs out the wall, and eventually the wall will collapse and you'll need to build a new wall. But nothing grows on them. And in a mangrove environment, you have all these nooks and crannies that fish can live in, that plants can grow in, crabs and other invertebrates. So seawalls just aren't great for the environment. So when new developments come in and want to build on the shore, we always recommend that they use some type of natural erosion protection, like planting native plants that have really deep roots to hold on to the sediment, for example. One of the big threats to manatees is entanglement. So fishing line wrapping around their fins, their pectoral fins, and they oftentimes need to be rescued for that. The wounds can be pretty deep and they'll need antibiotics. Sometimes they need surgery to remove dead tissue. There was a manatee at one of the springs a few years ago that was actually trapped in a bike tire. The tire was around its body and it had to be rescued and the tire removed. They also will eat plastic and fishing line, which can cause internal perforation, and they'll die from that.
Do you have any stories like you almost died and fell off a cliff and then a manatee saved you or something?
I'm from New York originally, so I moved down to Florida to do my master's. And the first time that I ever saw a manatee in the wild was during a master's course where I was going out on a boat. And when I was out there, the captain of the boat, we saw the manatees. And of course, I was ecstatic to see one for the first time. And he said, "Oh, I don't care for manatees." I was like, "Wait, hold on. What do you mean? There are people out there who don't like manatees?" And, say that they just fart all the time. Like, I don't think they just fart all the time. I don't think that that's all that they do. But it opened my eyes to the fact that manatees aren't universally beloved like I would have thought that they were. And a lot of that comes from, I would say it comes from people not wanting to be restricted on what they're able to do when they're boating, right? They want to take out their boat and they want to go as fast as they want down this canal and not be told what speed to go. But by doing that, you're putting not just manatees at risk, but yourself at risk. And the manatee protection zones protect more than just manatees. They protect human life and habitat. And but you end up with manatees kind of being the bad guy in that situation, right? Because the zones are put in for manatee protection. And so then
This is sort of dumb, but you mentioned manatees farting. Do they fart? Is that a
oh
thing?
yeah,
Really?
manatees are very gassy for sure.
How do manatees sleep and how long can they hold their breath?
Manatees can hold their breath for up to 20 minutes, but I've never personally seen them stay down for that long. It's typically between 5 to 7 minutes, sometimes longer than that. And they actually will, they sleep similar to the way that dolphins do, in that their brains don't turn all the way off when they sleep, because they do need to come up for air to breathe.
What's your story? How did you get into your organization and start saving manatees?
I'm really interested in how animals interact with their environment, why they choose to go where they go, and then what they're doing when they get there. And when I was doing my master's, I heard about the Clearwater Marine Aquarium Research Institute. They have a program where they tag manatees and then track them to see where they go and what they're doing. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do for my master's. So I worked with them, and they had years of tracking data. So there's a padded belt that goes around the tail of the manatee. And then attached to that is a tether that it's set to break away. So it's a breakaway tether, which means if it ever gets tangled on a branch or something, it'll break off. That way manatees don't get entangled when they're out living their life. And at the top of the tether is a floating radio tag. And that actually connects to a satellite passing overhead and pings their location. And so a lot of the time the animals are rescued, but when they're returned to the wild, they're fitted with a tag to make sure that they're doing well. And they are tagged usually around up to a year if the gear stays on the whole time, right? Because sometimes it can break off. And then if they do well, then they can graduate from the program essentially. And I got to look at the data from multiple animals and see what they did and where they were going, and then overlay that with the habitat data. So seeing they mostly hang out in the marsh over here, and you can learn a lot from their behavior that way. But then I also got to go out into the field and look for them. So these animals, they also have a VHF tag tracker on them. So you can go out and find them in the wild and watch them and see their behavior and see if they're doing well. And so getting to do that was an incredible experience. And then through that, I also learned about the different policies that protect manatees in Florida, the different management actions like the manatee protection zones and manatee protection plans. And all of that kind of prepared me for the job that I have now.
What do you see for manatees in the future?
A lot of Florida right now is kind of on the knife's edge when it comes to protecting our aquatic habitats. In the Indian River Lagoon, for example, they had been dealing with algal blooms recurring every 2 years for the last 10 years. And eventually the seagrass that was there couldn't keep up. and it died out. And that's what caused the massive starvation event that was happening over there. But there's also been a lot of work being done, especially that happened at the end of 2020. And there has been a lot of work being done to improve water quality. So money for infrastructure to improve the management facilities, people going out and doing seagrass plantings and clam plantings, trying to reduce the amount of nutrients entering the lagoon. And the water quality has improved to the point where there is grass coming back. But it just shows that if all of a sudden we were to stop those efforts, things would go back to the way they were before. So we're at this point in Florida where sometimes we get comfortable with how things are. And then because of that, we stop trying to improve and do better, and things start to fall apart. And so I think that will continue to be a common theme where you hear environmentalists crying out and saying there's obviously an issue here, but it doesn't get attention until you have something like 500 manatees dying, right? Like before that, people knew about it, but there wasn't funding to do anything about it. And so I think I would hope that in general, Florida says, hey, we should really be doing something now before this happens everywhere. But that isn't always the reality.
Thank you so much for talking with me, TJ. And thank you for watching. You can help animals by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. I'll see you next time on Nature's Guardians. Thank you so much. Bye.